Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
Yes, I think we're now live. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to the LRPT ConnectRVA 2045 Advisory Committee meeting. I am not Andrew. Happy to fill in for him because he may or may not recall I offered to help out, and he has done a good job of moving it forward without asking for that. So happy to be here today for him. So we are still following the statement regarding virtual meetings. It was advertised as appropriate. I've asked Chet if we can find a way to continue meeting virtually, and I know he's working on that. If you could, Ms. Mueller, go ahead and do the attendance for roll call to see if we have a quorum.
Absolutely. Thank you. Town of Ashland, Ms. Amos.
Here.
Chesterfield County, Ms. Smith. Ms. Benedict.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Kilduff. Hanover County, Mr. Vidunas.
Yep.
Mr. Flagg.
Here.
Henrico County, Ms. Meidler.
Here.
Ms. Deemer. New Kent County, Ms. Leduc.
Here.
Powhatan County, Mr. Pompey. Mr. Howland. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark. Mr. Bridewell.
Here.
Ms. Erickson. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC Transit System, Ms. Torres. Ms. Del Ross. And I believe Ms. Robinson is joining us today. Is that right?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am. RMTA, Ms. Simmons. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Present.
Right Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Sparks. VDOT, Ms. McAdory. Mr. Herman.
Here.
VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Present.
NAACP, Mr. Johnson. Richmond Area Bicycling Association, Mr. Burnley. Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Tran. Senior Connections, Mr. Williams. RVA Rapid Transit, Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Bike Walk RVA, Ms. Lockett Gordon. Port of Virginia, Ms. Nelson.
Present.
Southern Environmental Law Center, Mr. Pollard. Virginians for High Speed Rail, Daniel Plogger. Federal Highway Administration, Mr. Duran. And Tri-Cities MPO, Mr. Swikowski.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call. And Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. Is there any amendments to the agenda to be proposed? Not hearing any. Looks like we don't need action on this, so I will take consensus to move on to the next item for approval of the April 22nd meeting summary. Are there any amendments to what was included in your packet for the meeting summary? Okay, do we have a motion for approval of that summary?
I'll set a motion. This is Catherine Benedict.
Thank you, Catherine.
John O'Keefe, I'll second.
So we have a motion by Catherine Benedict for the approval of the April 22nd meeting summary and a second by John O'Keefe. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, moving on. Thank you. Is there any public comment to be received? Chet, did you receive any?
We did not, but I wanted to reiterate, I guess this is the right time, that we do use action minutes to record actions of the committee. And just to remind everybody, we do have the full recordings on our YouTube channel in case any member of the public ever wants to go back and review what was actually said by each and every one of us. They can do that on the YouTube channel. Thank you.
That's a great reminder. Thank you, Chet. The next item is a fairly lengthy one with the update of the LRTP process and in particular task 4 of programming. Sulab, are you starting for us?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Let me make this full screen first. Okay, so as we all know, this is the 4th phase of the long-range transportation planning, and a pretty critical one. The main fruit or main product of the LRTP is the constraint list of project, which is basically the outcome of this phase. So we have already completed phases 1 to 3, and this is the phase 4, and we have reached the last leg of it. There'll be discussion today, and we'll be asking for action in the next meeting. And then once the constraint plan or the list of project has been approved, we evaluate the plan, and then we proceed for adoption. So this is all the items we'll be discussing today. It's a pretty lengthy discussion as well as a lot of information to digest. I'll start with the presentation, and Miles will be following me, and then probably Chet would be towards the end of the presentation. So things to be covered: the universe of project scoring results, which we are going to reveal now, the budget allocation survey results, the constrained budget development, and then the staff recommended constrained list of projects, and then finally the next steps. So the universe of project scoring results, all highway, transit, park and ride, and active transportation projects were scored. Altogether 243 projects. Total needs for those projects, $7.8 billion. The cost was inflated to 2030 because we can't fund any project before 2027. And then the time band is 2027 to 2023. So we took the mid-year. So that's why we're using $2030. Bridge projects were not scored. So any maintenance or any preservation type of project, our scoring system is not applicable to those. And again, the bridge project requires dedicated funding, which is the state of good required funding. So all projects listed in the constraint list for bridges, 16 projects, we didn't score them, but all of them would automatically be in the constraint list. We have the budget for that. Rail projects were not scored. Altogether, we had 9 projects. Within the rail budget is for the statewide system rather than is broken down by the region or by the MPO. So we didn't get the rail revenue projection or estimates. So based on DRPT's guidance to put the rail projects in the vision list, we are so doing so. So they were not scored, but they'll all be in the vision list. The scoring process is pretty simple, as we had discussed in the project scoring guidelines meeting. So we calculate the raw value of each performance measures for each project. So we have 243 projects and then 15 performance measures. So altogether, we have 3,645 values which we need to enter or which we need to calculate. So a lot of the measures, the PM was calculated using GIS tool, which was programmed and automated by staff. Some of the other measures were used in a combination of GIS and Excel and the R software. Then the others came out from the travel demand model, as well as using R, the software R, and other things. So a lot of different things need to be done to get those values. So once we have the raw values for all the projects for each category, we normalize the value in the range of 0 to 100 in each PM category. So we'll have 243 PM values for, let's say, access to jobs. And the range might be from, let's say 5,000 to 2. So we normalize that 5,000, let's say, is the highest, that becomes 100. The lowest 2, it becomes 0, and then everything in between. So we normalize into scale of 0 to 100. And then we apply the PM weights, which we decided. So each PM has a weight. The goals have the weight, and then further the goals are divided in PMs and they have the weight. So the weights are applied to the normalized value, and then all the PM values are added to get the project benefit score. And then the final step is that the project benefit score is divided by the project cost, which is inflated to $2030 to get the final ConnectRVA 2045 project score. So that's the score we used for ranking. And then the ranking is done in ascending order. The highest project with the highest ConnectRVA 2045 project score would be ranked 1, and so forth. So this hasn't been shared yet, but it will be shared after this meeting. Let me show you the score sheet. So this is the score sheet we have. We have all the projects. It's a pretty lengthy spreadsheet, pretty big spreadsheet. And this is all for safety. Then we go to the mobility, which is green. We have 2 PM, person throughput, and then person hours of delay. Then we go to accessibility. We have 4 measures in accessibility. Then we go to the economic development. Then we have the environmental and land use. So all this is calculated, and then we have the project benefit score. We also calculate the project benefit add, not looking at the cost. Then we have the cost, and then we have the ConnectRVA 2045 project score, and then this is the rank final column. So this will be shared to you after the meeting, and anyone who wants to go into deep dive of the scoring process can do that. Apart from that, we also have scorecards for each project. So each project would have its individual scorecard like this. It's modeled like the smart scale project list, in which we have the ID, the project name, the facility, functional classification, project type, and then we have the goals, and then the performance measures, the unit of measurement. That's important because a lot of these numbers do not make any sense. What are we actually measuring? So that's why we have this unit of measurement. The PM value, the normalized value, the PM weight, goal value, goal weight, weighted goal value, project benefit, project cost, and then the ConnectRVA 2045 project score. So we have for all the projects, so we have 243 pages of this document, and which can be looked at. And then the final thing is the story map. We created, Greta in our staff created this. So we have all the universe of projects broken down by each category. And if you choose any project, you can choose that. It gives you the cost estimate. And then you can also go to the project scorecard. There's a link there. You just want to go to the click there and you'll go to the project scorecard. So this is I-64 widening eastbound. It shows that project. So this is all the things which we have done so that it's easier for everybody. Let me close that and go back to the presentation. So we did a little bit of analysis to look at what the projects which ranked the top in their respective goals. So we looked at looking at safety. It was mostly the BRT projects. Then there was one interchange modification project right in downtown in the population center. So that scored pretty good for safety. For mobility, we look at mostly highway projects. So Powhite Parkway Extension is there. The I-64 Ox Lane in exit 183, both the eastbound and the westbound. That's around South Pomp area. That project gives the best mobility results. Then we have the I-95 and I-64 interchange as well. if you look at our accessibility, again, the BRT projects, because we are providing new accessibility as well as providing faster headways. So the change in accessibility is great in any BRT or transit projects. Again, economic development, the BRT project scored well, as well as some of the widening, as well as the interchange modification project. I-95 Broad Street, I-64 interchange modification. Environmental land use, again, most of the BRT projects, as well as one enhanced transit route, the Midlothian one, that scored pretty good. And then once we look at the project benefit score, adding all these goals or categories into the total project benefit score, the Route 1 North BRT, which goes to Ashland, that scored the highest overall project score, 74.443. So that was highest, then followed by Midlothian BRT, West and South BRT, the Broad Street BRT, and then I-95 Broad Street, I-64 interchange modification. So these are the project benefits which we can look at. Now the picture changes, because now once we have the project benefit, we have to look at the cost as well. So once we divide the project benefit by the cost and then multiply that by 10 million, a lot of the projects which have some good benefit, but which are extremely, which has very less cost, like mostly below $1 million, those score pretty well. So as we can see that overall, the top 5 ranked projects, 3 projects are the Fall Line Trail, all 3 segments in the Richmond, because that's in the heart of the population. We have I-295 Auxiliary Lane. That's because it's pretty inexpensive projects, just $700,000 for that. And then we have the Franklin Street, 23rd Street, GRTC Neighborhood Transit Center, which is also pretty inexpensive. That's how it scored number 5. So that's all I have for the project scoring. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll send you the link of all the Excel files, as well as the scorecard, as well as the map, so that you can dive in detail to see what each project scored in each category if you are interested in. So that's all I have for the scoring result. It's a technical process. So the scoring process is done. It's not going to change. So it's been finalized. If there's any question before I proceed further, I'll be happy to answer that.
Sulab, this is Chad. I think it's important to mention that we're scheduling meetings with each of the member jurisdictions to go over the scores in more details and get feedback during the upcoming review period.
Yeah, it's basically not for the changing the scores, but it's just showing them how this scoring was done.
Right.
And it's basically for the constraint plan, which I'll be presenting later today. So.
Hey, Sulab.
Mhm.
This is Barb Smith.
Mhm.
You showed the highest benefits.
Mhm.
I got distracted. Did you show the highest benefit cost?
Yes, ma'am. Let
Can
me
you
go back.
to that real quick?
Yes, sure. Yep, this is the cost benefit ranks 1 to 5. As you can see, it's mostly very inexpensive projects. So it's all the projects basically 1 million or less. So that's why they score pretty much high.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mhm. So if there are no questions, and we have a long presentation, so we can take questions at any point. I'll go further with the budget allocation survey results. So it went live April 16th, closed May 15th, around 1 month time frame. Total visitors, 512 people visited the site. Almost half of them completed the survey, 278 completed surveys. And the journal comments we received in this MetroQuest, as well as the website blog, was altogether 78 comments. So as we can see that this is the house home location of the respondents. It's spread throughout the city, at least throughout the region. I mean, mostly obviously concentrated in the main population center of the region. But looking at the map, almost all the localities are covered. Obviously, most people in and around the city, as well as the suburbs in Chesterfield and Henrico. The other thing, we also asked the primary question whether what is the primary travel mode for the people who completed the survey. And we can see that the automobile or car is 77%, walk and bike is total 18%, transit 5%. So we can see that the total walking and biking to work is 18%, which is pretty higher than the regional average, which is, I guess, around 3 to 7%. So we can say that the survey is a little bit skewed towards people using biking and walking as their mode of transportation to work. We also asked some socioeconomic questions relating to race, ethnicity. As you can see in the graph here, 83% was from the majority population, white, non-Hispanic, 17% with all other race and ethnicity, which is again not representative of the proportion of the race in the region. The minority population is more than 40% in the region. So it's not a scientific survey, it's skewed towards the majority population. Looking at the age, we have a few people under 20, very young people doing that, but mostly people within the range from 30 to 59. That's the bulk of the population. Obviously, we have 60 and above 58 people filling up this survey as well. And then we asked some other questions like, how did you find about this survey to see how our public engagement process was going up? So we received those responses. Social media, 28%. The actual committee members for any of our committees in RRTPO, that was 4%. 4% of the people follow the plan as well. And new people got direct email from RRTPO, that's 25%. And it was recommended by friend or colleagues or was passed through social media, that was 24%, and then the others is 13%. We also asked a few questions regarding the familiarity of things related to transportation in the region. We asked whether people are familiar with the pulse, and it's surprising to see that only 88% of people who replied back or completed the survey are aware of the pulse BRT system. So that was pretty strange to see. I thought maybe 100% people know about it. We also asked whether people are aware of Plan RVA as well as the RRTPO. And we see that around 60% of the people who answered the surveys are aware of that. We also asked about whether the ConnectRVA 2045 long-range transportation plan, 55% people said they knew about it, about the process. And then similarly, CVTA, 54%, and the Fall Line Trail, 52%. So this is the main fruit or the main thing which we wanted to ask. So we asked, how should the money be spent? We provided coins, 9 $10 bill and one 10 $1 bill, a total of $100, which could be spent in 7 categories. So highway maintenance, transit frequency, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, highway expansion, transit network expansion, freight, and passenger rail. So based on the responses we got, this is the, towards the left is the results. So out of the $100, people are saying almost $20 should be spent on bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. 17% said on transit expansion, highway maintenance 16%, passenger rail 16% again, more transit frequency 14%, highway expansion 7%, and then freight 5%. And then we had some dollars which were unaccounted for, people probably just forgot it to use the whole amount of money. So we had around 4% unaccounted money as well. So that's the results for the budget allocation survey. Before I proceed further, is there any questions regarding the survey?
Does anyone have any questions for Sulab?
Hey, Sulab, the slideshow will be available to all of us after the meeting.
Yeah, it'll be uploaded in our website as well as the ConnectRVA 2045 website as well.
Sulab, is the transit network expansion and transit frequency are separate categories. So the actual spending on transit in this particular budget would be over $30.
Yeah, I think we could make that interpretation for sure.
Okay, and then highway expansion and maintenance total would be around 24.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, Ben, this is Chad. We split those out intentionally to kind of follow the conversation right now about ridership versus coverage.
Thank you.
Yep.
So if we don't have any further questions, I guess I'll pass over to Miles. Miles, do you want to share the screen? And,
sure, thanks.
Yeah.
So the next piece was developing a constrained budget. So we have an idea of what sorts of projects we wanted to fund. So we need to know how much money we had. We went over this briefly a while back, but we've had some time to refine it. So just as a reminder, constraint basically means that our investments are possible within the limits of our expected revenues, which means we need to project our revenues out to 2045. So the basic process, VDOT prepares highway revenue projections for all the different funding sources. DRPT prepared near-term transit projections for federal revenues, so through the next 4 years. And then they also provided all the state funding, so capital grants and operating contributions. So then TPO staff had to prepare projections for federal transit funding all the way out to 2045. So we used the standard escalator, which matched what was used on the highway revenues, just mirroring exactly what we did with RSTP, CMAQ, all the other federal funding. And then we also needed to prepare some sort of revenue estimates for GRTC. The reason we needed to do this was basically there's a interconnection with capital and operating funding for transit. A lot of the funds can go either way. So we need a sense of what's being used for operating before we can really understand what can be used for capital. So we looked at their historic growth patterns, projected ridership based on the model outputs, and looked at factors such as current law, which requires local contributions to be adjusted over time with inflation, and use that to develop a forecast for the estimated revenues. So this next slide will look very familiar. So this is just the breakdown over 6-year periods for the revenues. The only difference from what you've seen before is that the operating side for GRTC is also included. So that's the state operating assistance, the operating contributions, and operating revenues. And this was, again, all developed based on the information that we had from recent studies and a historic growth pattern. And then this is the highway side. You can see it's significantly larger on the whole. This is the bulk of it is that CVTA revenue that you're seeing. That's a large segment, but overall the plan has about $20.5 billion. I think the initial number we looked at was about 19.3, but that didn't include the operating revenues. So the planned investments, what we need to do is cover that entire 2022 to 2045 with the investments. We've divided the investments into those 4 time periods that you just saw for the revenue projections. The reason we do that is to be able to apply a generalized inflation rate for each time period. So the approach that we took is the same one that we've used in previous plans. So it's 2.5% per year. And then we go to the midpoint of the time period, which we chose year 3. So for every time period, there was a set inflation rate that was used from the 2020 cost to that time period. And then the investments were divided among programmatic, which is essentially maintenance and operations of the existing system, local investments, which are projects don't qualify as regional based on the inclusion guidelines, and then the regional projects, which is really the heart of this plan. So the funding was split based on current investment patterns and the funding source. So we discussed some of this before, how smart scale funds tend to go one way or the other. So we went back through and reanalyzed a lot of that information. Some of the bigger changes from what we'd initially reviewed and when we had a little more time to look into it, smart scale historically over the past 4 rounds has gone 2/3 towards regional projects. So we increased the amount going towards regional projects and decreased the going towards the local side. The other thing that we changed with the budget side was that the CVTA local revenues, after looking at the FY21 plans, was about 50% going to projects that would be considered regional. So we assume that moving forward, the localities will continue to invest in their bigger projects, their bigger priorities, and using 50% of the money that is local for these regional projects as well. The other piece of this for the planned investments was it also required us to look at GRTC's operating and capital side. So just like with the revenues, we had to get some sense of what their operating expenses would be to be able to figure out how much capital was available. So we looked at recent budgets. We looked at the consultant projections that have gone on over the past year or so. We looked at several planning documents and then applied some linear forecasting to be able to calculate those values. So this is what we came up with for the programmatic side and the local investment side. You can see it's about 14.3 billion in total. So the vast majority of the funding is going to programmatic or local investments. And you can see it's broken down. So the programmatic side, this is basically each of these categories, for the most part, has its own funding source. And then the GRTC operation and maintenance was based on our forecasting. The local side, the GRTC local capital, that was taking essentially 87% of what was left over and available for capital to go towards bus replacement, basic equipment replacement. So it's maintaining the current system largely. The enhanced mobility investments, that's dedicated funding for enhanced mobility for seniors and persons with disabilities. So that's always going to be a local investment. They're more minor projects. And then the local transportation projects, these are the ones that don't qualify as regional. And this was basically determined looking at 50% of the local CVTA pot and 1/3 of each of the smart scale funds. We compared it against the draft SIP for the FY22 to 27 years, and this is beyond what was already programmed. So we're pretty comfortable with what's projected here. So that gets us finally to the regional investments, which is the heart of all this. So the regional budget was developed after we accounted for the local and programmatic investments. The budget also required us to account for any regional projects that are already committed. So projects that are in the 6-year program and any balances that would remain after those 6 years. So essentially, once we remove that, I'll show you on the next slide, but it's about $5.5 billion that was available for the plan. So the way that we looked at it, instead of looking at each funding category separately, we classified them into 4 broader categories to simplify the process. So there was a category for flexible funding, which is RSTP, CVTA, Smart Scale, essentially any funding source that could be used towards any of these projects. We had an air quality, which is the CMAQ funding. So CMAQ is relatively flexible, but the biggest constraint is it cannot be used for any sorts of widening projects. So it's really more for the transit, the active transportation, and some types of intersection improvements. Then there were the transit funds, which are dedicated to transit projects. So that was GRTC share of CVTA and 5307 funds, which is FTA's more flexible transit funding source. And then finally, there was the active transportation pot, which is the TA set aside. These are funds dedicated to bike and pedestrian improvements. So this is the available constrained budget. So as I mentioned, we started at 6.2 billion, which was what was left over after the 14.3. We had to take out almost 700 million for projects that are already selected and funded and committed through the 6-year program, which leaves us this budget here. And this is broken down in those 4 categories. So you can see it's pretty small for the first 6 years since a lot of the funding's already been committed and projects are already in place. But it's pretty significant, especially as we get towards the long term. It's almost $2 billion available. So that leads us to the final piece of the constraint plan development. So once we had that budget, we had to work through the project list. Essentially what we did was we went down the list based on the scores. And for each time period, if the project hadn't already been selected, we looked to see if there was enough funding that it could use. So for every project, we determined if it was eligible for the transit funds, the active funds, the CMAQ funds. And then if there was enough, we funded it. If we didn't, we moved down to the next project. For projects that could use multiple funding sources, we always made sure to use the dedicated funding source first, then CMAQ since it's the more flexible, and then the fully flexible funds. And then any funding that was available at the end of that process, once we'd gone through the entire time period, was rolled over to the next time period. So if we had $5 million left over, we made sure that that $5 million was still being used to help fund the next round of projects that would be in this following time band. So this is the financial side of the proposed budget, and Sulabh's going to go into more detail on how we got here. But basically, the current term is actually the largest number of projects because there was not the inflationary impacts, so we were able to fund more projects in this time period. But essentially, all of the active transportation projects are funded, all the park and ride projects, and then transit, it's all the enhanced routes in here, and then there's roadway. And you can see over time, it skews more heavily towards roadway. That's essentially, we ran out of projects in other modes in large part. So there weren't active transportation projects left to fund. But this is the draft constraint plan in terms of the budget side. The one thing to note is there is about $49.3 million left over in the long term. Essentially, the way it worked out, the funding was split in a way that we couldn't use it to fund any additional projects. So there was about 7 million in flexible funding, 12 million in transit funding, and 20 some odd million in CMAQ funding. And it just didn't line up to work for any of the individual projects left in the vision list. So this is where we are now. Sulabh's going to go over more of the details, but before I turn it back over, does anyone have questions about how we developed the constrained plan or any comments on that?
Hey, Miles,
Yes.
is this then the pool by which the projects were then put in there that you scored? They were basically taken into these things, and then you tried to apply that to create a table of projects then?
Yes. So this is
243.
This table here is basically the budget that we use to develop the 243 projects in select time bands.
Thanks.
Not hearing anything else, I'll turn it back over to Sulabh to give a little bit more detail on the numbers that we provided here.
Thank you, Miles. Based on what Miles said, the projects in the constraint plan normally are based on the scored rank of the project, which is the ConnectRVA 2045 project ranking. So the rank 224, that was the cutoff rank to be in the constraint list of projects. And there are exceptions, which I'll talk about. So some of the projects which were above 224 rank, and then they were removed from the constraint list, were a few projects which had strong opposition from the public. Cumulative projects, like let's talk about the Powhite extension. So Powhite extension had 5 projects. So unless the first section of Powhite is built, we can't build the second section. So in case the second section had just the individual, looking at the individual project, meaning if it had scored more, and the first project was not in the constraint list, we removed those projects to be in the vision list, because logically the first project has to come first. And we didn't calculate the cumulative benefit because in projects like that, we need to calculate the overall cost as well as the overall cumulative benefit of that projects. We haven't done that. So those kind of projects were removed. Some of the projects which were in the universe of projects just to be tested. It wasn't a priority for the project champions, and it was just there for the testing. Some of those projects were removed. Then the BRT routes, most of them scored well, but the logic, it was removed from the constraint list because logically, there has to be enhanced transit route because before there is a BRT route, and all enhanced transit are in the constraint plan. And most of the enhanced transit as well as the BRT transit, the cost overlaps because there is already some cost estimated for the enhanced transit. It will be addition if we do the BRT, but the staff recommends that we remove the BRT for the time being and keep the enhanced transit route in the constraint plan. And once the enhanced transit route is there in actual, is in the ground, then we can always amend the LRTP and include the BRT routes. So
Rob, you deliberately have left out all of the BRT routes, including ones that do in the next 3 or 4 years. When the north-south route is in the process of being studied now, that doesn't make any sense.
So the enhanced route is there for the Route 1 North.
I know, you and I both know what an enhanced route is, but we also know we're talking about BRT on the north-south route.
Right, so that is just the staff recommendation. It's not the final constraint list. So we have an opportunity from now till next to decide what project and what everybody thinks would be right can be added. So,
all right, well, I'm making an objection to it. So if there's a chance to discuss it, I think we need to discuss it.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then a few projects were added. A time band was swapped, as Miles mentioned earlier, to use all funding sources. So let's say a project was ranked a little bit lower, but it was able to use transit funds or CMAQ funds. The other project wasn't able to use, so it was listed in the previous time band or was added to the constraint list. And also so that we put the complementary projects together. So let's say we have the Route 64 eastbound and westbound widening. If one project is in one time band, the other in the other time band, we try to keep both the projects in the same time band. So out of the 243 projects which were scored, 208 projects made it to the constraint list. That is just the staff recommended. It's not the final list. All active transportation and all park and ride projects in the constraint list. Bridge projects, as I mentioned earlier, they were not scored, but all of them are in the constraint list. The rail projects are not scored, and no projects are in the constraint list. So altogether, 268 projects in the universe of projects. 243 projects scored, 25 projects, the rail projects and the bridge projects were not scored. 224 projects altogether in the constraint list, and the remaining projects, which includes some highway projects, the BRT transit projects, as well as the rail projects, altogether 44 projects in the vision list. So this is just the breakdown of the funding for the different time bands. Time band 1, which is in time band 1, we have the committed list as well. So 5 projects we were actually in the universe of projects got recently funded in the smart scale. So those projects were removed from the universe of projects, and those are in the committed list with all the other SIP projects. So altogether, we have 62 projects, reasonably significant projects based on our guidelines in the committed list, including the 5, which was in the universe of projects. And then in time band 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's the constraint list. As Miles said, time band 1 has the most projects because the ranking, the way it works, that the cheaper projects get higher ranking. So we were able to accommodate more projects in time band 1. Lesser than that, 47 projects in time band 2, 36 in time band 3, and then 23 projects in time band 4. And then we have the vision list of projects. We have 35 highway and transit projects. Altogether, the cost of those projects based on 2020 dollars is $1.5 billion. We don't know where those would be funded. So if you look at the inflated cost to 2030, it's around $2 billion. And then we have the 9 rail projects, which is $1.3 billion, looking at the 2020 dollars, and $1.75 billion if you look at the 2030 inflated rate. So that's the constraint list of project staff recommended list. And I'll just show you the constraint project draft, which will be sent to you after this meeting to see exactly which projects are kept in which time band. So this is the cost constraint list for time band 1, which is the committed projects based on the SIP. And then the 5 projects which are now are funded based on smart scale, which are in the universe of projects. So they are highlighted in orange here. And we have the time band 1. We have the all the information required for the project. And then we have the funding, which funding source were used for each project, the flexible fund, transit funds, active funds, CMAQ funds, rank of the project, and which time band the project is. And if there is any changes, any project which is not in the rank, so let's say this is 100 and this is 103. So it was, this project was moved from time band 2 to accommodate time 1 remaining funding balance. So other projects ranking 101 and 102 were more expensive than what the remaining balance was. That's why this project, so we have those staff notes here. Similarly, we have that for time band 2, time band 3, and then time band 4. And then we have the vision list as well. All the projects in the vision list are there. And we have the notes as well. This will be shared to you after the meeting today so that we can have more further discussion about these. So before we go into discussion, I just wanted to say what the next steps is. So the public review period starts today, immediately after this meeting. It's a 15-day public review period. And the public will review the staff recommended constraint list of projects and provide us any comments. And then simultaneously, we'll have individual project meetings with the champions as well as advisory committee members. So we have already scheduled a few meetings with the project champions, which are the localities. That will basically take place from literally tomorrow to 6/14. And based on the priority of the locality, as well as to add or remove projects, we'll have discussion about it. And then based on all the input from all the localities, as well as the project champions, staff will have the final draft by 6/18. And then the LRTP advisory committee would be asked for approval on June 24th. So it's a very squeezed timeline, which we have to accommodate based on the timeline for the plans approval. And then it'll go to the policy board for approval on July 1st. So the major thing is that we have the staff recommended list, and we'll have individual meeting with all the members, all the champions, all the locality members, as well as other members from the advisory committee individually, and accommodate their what changes they want in that particular plan. So, and it's a compromise. So we have to come up with something which everybody agrees upon. So that's the catchphrase. So the list we are seeing is just the staff recommended, and I guess there would be multiple iterations of the constraint list for that to make everybody happy and for everybody to agree upon it. So that's the stage we are in. Next 2 weeks, we'll be in individual discussion with everybody. So that's all I have for this task 4. So if we want any further discussion, I think we can start immediately.
Sulab, in the materials that you have, do you have a separate list of the projects that were not selected for the constrained list?
Yes, we have that. So there is something called as the vision list, this list. So this is the one which is not in any, it's not constrained. It's the list of projects in the universe of project which are not committed or constrained to any time band.
Okay, that's what the vision list is. All right, I get it.
Yep.
It's an interesting euphemism.
Sulab, this is Joe Bidenis.
Mhm.
Would you, it was probably important to confirm and clarify that this is not an allocation document, that, because a project appears in time band 1 or time band 2 does not guarantee funding of that particular project. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's the correct statement. All it matters is that it has to be in the constraint list. If there is a question whether the project is in the LRTP or not, if it's asked in smart scale or any other funding sources, regardless of what time band it is, it's in the LRTP and it's in the constraint list. The thing is, it has to be in the constraint list.
Excuse me, it has to be in the constraint list in order to be considered for smart scale. Is that what you're saying?
No, if I think this is a little bit gray area, as we have projects which are specifically listed in the LRTP, which is basically the constraint list, and they have something called as projects which are not specifically listed, but which are compatible or which are in accordance with the long range transportation plan. So people use those kind of things as well. So it's a gray area. So.
And we don't know what the CVTA criteria will be on this, right?
That's correct. We're working through that right now. It'll probably be more select. It will be more selective than the process that we use to rank and prioritize the projects here.
Thank you.
I think in terms of the smart scale question, we have for the entire universe of projects, we have the analysis. So it's just a matter of so we can back up applications with the data that we've developed. It's just for the vision list, these are projects that were obviously didn't score high enough to be put into the constraint list based on their benefit costs.
That isn't what I understood you to say about the BRT. I thought they scored well, but you decided on a policy basis to go with the enhanced routes rather than the BRT routes.
Yes, and that, Ben, this is Chad. In that case, in conversation with between staff and the folks who, some of the folks who had a hand in the vision plan, the choice was made in terms of staff recommendation to look at the 15-minute service as the next step because of the ability to realize cost savings and spread the budgeted funds around to a larger number of projects in the region. Obviously, the BRT routes are going to be more expensive, so we would have to. It would be a reduced number of projects in the full list.
I hate to be tedious here.
You'll see.
We're talking about operating funds for enhanced transit, and we're talking about capital funds for BRT. So they're different categories of funds. And this is capital funds, right?
Yeah, this is just
capital
the
funds.
Yeah, just the capital funds.
Yeah.
Are additional buses considered a capital expense? And would that be required to increase the frequency? That's a question.
They are. They tend to be funded through regular federal funding that's available, as opposed to BRT, which takes, some exceptional capital investment, which in the past has come through specialized federal grants or specialized state money. So we'll work on it. I don't need to take anybody else's time on this, but we will work on it.
Sure. So the BRT includes all the capital funds, the corridor-wide sidewalks, crosswalks, any traffic signals, new bus purchases, signal priority software, things like that. Everything are included in the capital cost. Chet, do you want to add anything about the meetings we have started to schedule about to talk with the individual champions?
Sure. I mentioned it earlier out of turn, and so we're scheduling meetings with each of the 9 member jurisdictions, and I believe everyone has acknowledged the meetings. I think we're waiting on 2 more to be scheduled over the next 10 days. But we're going to sit down with each of the jurisdictions and talk about their constraint lists in particular, and see if there are any changes or additions that they would like to make based on their initial review. I did want to note on the screen is the next steps. The policy board approval on the first is just for the constraint list. This is not the whole plan. There's other steps to follow after this, and part of the reason the schedule is like it is because there are some federal reviews, the conformity analysis that has to take place, and we have to make sure that that's able to be included before the final plan has to be adopted. So we're working with everybody as much as possible. There will be additional public review time in the future for the full plan, and so this is not the end goal in mind. This is just for the constraint list.
One question going back, if I could, on the constraint list, why is it that you all of the 9 rail projects were put on the vision list?
Sure, I can answer that one. So rail revenues are statewide, and there is no available information on how to break that down to the MPO level or the regional level. And because of that, it's going to be a state-funded program. There's other funding sources that are also state level that aren't included in this, obviously. Revenue sharing, as an example, or the new I-64 and I-95 pots of money. So anything that's a state level that we couldn't really factor in and figure out what our share would be isn't included.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, and so our homework, I guess, is to review the list that'll be sent out after this meeting, and we will have the opportunity to meet in person with the TPO staff to go over that. Anything else, Chet or Sulab, that I'm missing? Are you ready
No.
to move on? Go ahead.
Yeah, I
Sulab.
think that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
So next item in the agenda is the LRTP final schedule. We already have, we already mentioned about the cost constraint plan development. The policy board has to approve that by 7/1. And then we have the constraint plan evaluation. The most important one is the air quality conformity assessment. Once the constraint plan, the list of the project has been finalized and approved by the LRTP, by the policy board, we need to have interagency consultation meeting, which includes the the locality members from the air quality conformity region, localities in the region, as well as EPA and some other state and federal agencies. So we need to have that interagency consultation meeting, and then the RRTPO TAC at the same time will start the public review period just for the constrained list of projects for the air quality conformity. So that 15-day period for the air quality conformity would start from July 9th and would end in July 24th. And then once we have the public comments, VDOT will develop a report for the air quality assessment for the long range transportation plan 2045, which will also include the Tri-Cities MPO's previous long range transportation plan, as well as the FY 21 to 24 TIP. So all these projects in all these documents would be considered. So the air quality or air conformity area is much more than RRTPO. It includes localities in the Tri-Cities MPO as well. And once the policy board approves that in the August meeting, VDOT will submit that to Federal Highway, and then Federal Highway has 45 days to provide us the conformity determination. The conformity determination has to be provided before the plan has been adopted. It can't go beyond that, otherwise we'll be out of compliance. So other things in the constraint plan evaluation, which would be from once the constraint plan has been finalized till mid of August, would be the environmental justice analysis, the accessibility analysis, which is basically after the fact, based on what projects are there in the constraint list. We have the ConnectRVA 2045 performance measures, looking at the base year 2017, the E+C, which is the existing and committed year, which is 2026, as well as 2045, and compare these scenarios. We are planning to do an economic impact analysis. This is to be determined based on if staff has enough time to do this. All the evaluation for the constraint plan would be updated to the LRTP advisory committee in their July and August meeting. Policy board, it would be updated in the September meeting. And the final thing is the plan adoption. We need to finalize the plan document by August 15th, and we have a 1 month final public review period, which starts from August 15th to September 15th, in which, if possible, we'll have some in-person meeting as well. We'll also go to the localities in their board of supervisors, town council, city council meeting, if that's viable as well in that period, to give an update of the plan to all the localities. And then the LRTP advisory committee we will ask them for the adoption the last week of September. And then the policy board needs to approve this before October 7th. So first week of October. We haven't nailed the date yet, but that would be the first week of October. So pretty hectic schedule for the next 4 or 5 months. A lot of work to be done. But I guess we'll be able to finish the things as scheduled. So yeah, that's all for the LRTP final schedule.
Thank you, Sulabh. This process has been a lengthy one, but I know that you all on the staff level have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and we appreciate that. So any questions on this final schedule? If none, I see that our next meeting is proposed for June 24th at 9 a.m. And if we have no other action items or any comments, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.